You are looking at a slab of baked clay smaller than a laptop, covered edge to edge in tiny wedge-shaped marks, and every one of those marks was pressed into wet mud by a human hand almost 4,000 years ago. That tablet claims to record a conversation, not a myth, a set of instructions, and when you actually translate what the god Enki tells the first humans, the story we were raised on falls apart, because the tablet does not say we were created out of love. It says we were manufactured to work. It says we were built as a labor force from clay and the blood of a murdered god. And it says the same gods who made us later voted to erase us. That is not my interpretation. That is the line-by-line reading of a text sitting in the British Museum right now, copied by a named scribe around 1646 before the Common Era. I am going to show you exactly where the accepted, comfortable version stops matching the words on the clay. I am going to walk you through what a modern pattern reanalysis pulled out of the translation that most people skim right past. And I am going to end on one specific line, one buried detail about what still lives inside your own chest that I did not believe until I read it in 3 separate scholarly editions. I have to tell you, when I first laid the old translation beside the newer one on my desk at 2 in the morning and saw that the same phrase kept repeating like a ledger entry, the hair on my arm stood up. I want to explain why. So stay with me, because this only gets stranger the closer you look. Let me start with what this tablet actually is, because the name matters. Scholars call it the Atrahasis Epic. Atrahasis is a name, and it means roughly exceedingly wise. He is the human at the center of the story. The main version we have was written in the Old Babylonian period, and here's the part I love. Because it is so specific, it feels like a fingerprint. The most complete copy carries what is called a colophon, a little signature block at the end, and it names the scribe who wrote it. In most readings, his name is given as Kuaya, a junior scribe, and he dates his own work to the reign of a Babylonian king named Saduqa, who was a great-grandson of the famous Hammurabi. That places the writing at roughly 1646 before the Common Era. Think about that for a second. We do not just have an anonymous legend floating out of the fog of prehistory. We have a dated document written by a named apprentice on an assignment, copying an even older story that was already ancient to him. This is not a campfire tale. It is a manuscript with a byline. The definitive scholarly edition was published in 1969 by 2 researchers, Wilfred G. Lambert and Alan R. Millard, in a book with the plain title Atrahasis, The Babylonian Story of the Flood. Then in 1989, Stephanie Dalley produced another careful translation in her collection, Myths from Mesopotamia. I put those 2 side by side. That is where this whole thing started for me, because I expected them to disagree in the interesting places, the strange places, and instead they agreed almost word for word on the parts that disturbed me most. So what does it say? The opening lines are the ones that stopped me cold. The tablet begins not with humans, but with gods doing labor. It says, when the gods were man, they did the work, they bore the drudgery. Read that again. When the gods were man, before we existed, the story says, the gods themselves had to dig the rivers and canals. There was a lower class of gods called the Igigi, and they were forced to do the backbreaking work for the higher gods, the great ones. And the Igigi did this for a very long time, and the text even tries to count it in thousands of years of digging. But here is where the official summary, the one you will find in a textbook, goes soft and vague, and here is where the tablet goes hard and specific. The Igigi did not simply get tired, they rebelled. They burned their tools. They surrounded the house of the chief god at night, in the dark, with torches. And this is the moment everything hinges on, because the solution the gods reach is not to free the workers. The solution is to build a replacement worker, to manufacture something new that will carry the labor forever so the gods never have to. That new thing is us. Now, Most retellings I found online stop there, at the nice, clean idea that humans were made to serve the gods. Therefore, I want to slow down exactly where they speed up, because the method described on the clay is far more unsettling than the summary lets on, and it is the method that a careful rereading forces you to confront. The mother goddess, called Nintu or Mami in the text, is told she will create this new creature, but she says she cannot do it alone. She needs raw material, and the raw material specified is not just clay. The tablet is explicit. One god must be slaughtered. His flesh and his blood must be mixed into the clay. And then, from that mixture, the human being is formed. Let me be precise about the wording, because this is where I stop trusting the gentle version. In Lambert and Millard, and again in Daly, the god who proposes the plan, the clever one, the one who provides the wisdom for the whole operation, is Enki, known in the Akkadian text as Ea. Enki is the god of fresh water, of craft, of intelligence. And Enki instructs that a specific god be put to death so that his substance can be baked into the first people. The clay is the body. The divine blood is the animating spark. So the answer to the block I opened with, what did Enki actually tell humans, begins to take a shape you were never taught in school. He did not tell us we were the beloved children of the cosmos. The text has him engineering us, mixing us, setting our purpose before we drew a breath. And that purpose was to lift the basket off the god's shoulders and carry it ourselves. But if that were the whole story, it would just be grim. It would not be disturbing. What makes it disturbing is who they chose to kill and what they left inside us on purpose. And that is the thread I had to pull next. The god who is slaughtered has a name in the text. In several readings, it is given as We'ila, or in other transcriptions. We'ila and Daly renders the sense of him as a god who had intelligence, who had reason. This is not a random victim. The tablet specifies that the sacrificed god possessed Temu, an Akkadian word meaning intelligence, understanding, the capacity to plan. In other words, they did not slaughter some brute, they slaughtered the mind. They took the one with reason, and they folded his reason into the clay. When I first read that, I thought it might be a translation flourish, so I did the thing I always do when a detail feels too neat. I ran the passage through a comparative analysis, lining up the Akkadian terms that the translators footnoted, and I looked for the wordplay, because Babylonian scribes love to hide meaning in the sound of words. And what surface is the kind of thing that makes you sit back from the screen. The Akkadian word for God is Ilu. The word for the intelligence of that slain god is Temu. And the word for the human being that results in the text is Awilu. The scribes built the word for man out of the pieces of the sentence describing the murder. Ilu plus Temu. God plus reason. Baked together, they spell the human. The very name for our species in the text is a scar left by the killing. That is not something you invent by accident, and it is not something a casual reader ever notices. It took cross-referencing the linguistic notes to see it sitting there in plain sight. So here is where I was a few weeks in. I had a dated tablet, a named scribe, 2 respected editions that agreed, and a creation story that read less like religion and more like an industrial procedure with a body count. And I still had not reached the part that genuinely kept me up, because so far, being made to work is one thing, but the same document that describes our manufacture also describes our recall notice. Let me tell you what the gods do once we exist. This is the middle of the epic, and it is the section I think most people have never actually had read to them. Humanity multiplies. We do our job. We work the land, we build, we breed, and there are more and more of us. And the chief god, Enlil, the one who runs the whole operation, cannot sleep. The tablet says, the noise of humankind became too much. The word used carries the sense of clamor, of uproar, of a rumble rising up from the earth. And Enlil, disturbed, decides there are simply too many of us. Now watch the sequence, because it is not one flood and done, the way the shortened version tells it. The tablet lays out a staged program of population reduction, and it repeats the structure 3 times, like a technician running through escalating options. First, Enlil sends a plague, a wasting sickness meant to thin the numbers. And each time, humanity is saved by the same figure, our wise man Atrahasis, who goes to the god Enki, the one who made us, and asks what to do. Enki gives him a workaround. Concentrate your worship on the specific god responsible for the plague, Enki says. Shame that god into lifting it, and it works. The plague stops. So Enlil escalates. Next comes drought. The rains are cut off, the fields go to salt and dust, and the text describes the famine in physical stages. It describes the land turning white with salt. It describes people's faces changing color from hunger. And once again, Atrahasis begs Enki, and once again, Enki tells him how to break the drought. Then Enlil escalates again, cutting off the waters entirely, and the famine described this time is the part I can barely read aloud because the tablet spells out what starving people do to survive, and it does not flinch. It describes households dividing, then dividing again, until the unthinkable, and through all of it, the pattern holds. Enlil wants us gone. Enki keeps saving us. The two forces that built us are now at war over whether we get to keep existing. This is the ledger entry I mentioned, the phrase that repeated, the structure of catastrophe, appeal, and rescue cycles through the text with the cold regularity of a spreadsheet. When I laid the two translations together and highlighted the repeated formulas, the page lit up like a pattern had been stamped through it. This was recorded with the care of an accountant. And accountants do not write fairy tales. Which brings us to the flood. Because when the plague fails and the famines fail, Enlil reaches for the final option. He decides to wipe out the human race completely with a deluge, and he makes the other gods swear an oath of secrecy. No one is to warn the humans. Let them drown, all of them, and be done with the noise. And now I need to speak directly to the part of you that has been building an objection this whole time, because I built the same objection myself, and I think if you have made it this far, you deserve to hear it argued honestly instead of brushed aside. You are thinking, this is just mythology. Every ancient culture had creation stories. Of course, a Bronze Age society imagined gods that behaved like petty, exhausted kings because their own kings behaved that way. Of course, they explained plague and famine and flood as divine punishment because they had no germ theory and no meteorology. The clay, the blood, the murdered god, the recall order, all of it is just the ancient human mind doing what it always does, telling a story to make a terrifying world feel like it has a reason behind it. That is the rational read, and I want you to stay with me right here, because this next part is built specifically for the skeptic, and I count myself as one. Here is where that clean explanation started to crack for me. If this were only a story invented to comfort people, why does it insult the gods so thoroughly? Think about it. The gods in this text are not majestic. They are lazy. They panic. They lie. They swear a cowardly oath to drown their own workforce, and then when the flood actually comes, the tablet says the gods themselves are terrified of it. It says they cower. It says the mother goddess who created us weeps and regrets what she agreed to and cries that she cannot get her people back. In one of the most striking images in the whole thing, when the survivors finally make an offering after the flood, the starving gods swarm around the smell of it like flies because they had cut off their own food supply when they killed the humans who fed them. That is not how you write propaganda for your religion. That is not a story invented to make people feel safe and obedient. It is far too honest about the gods being dependent, frightened, and wrong. And that honesty is the first crack, because comforting myths do not usually make the powers of the universe look like a management team that panicked and got outsmarted by their own product. The second crack is the specificity of the accounting I keep coming back to. A myth built to explain a scary world tends to be vague, poetic, symbolic. This text is not vague. It gives you a labor dispute with a cause. It gives you a manufacturing process with an ingredient list. It gives you a 3-stage population control program with escalating measures. It even, in some versions, has the gods institute permanent controls on human population afterward. Things like categories of women who will not bear children and a demon who takes infants. presented as deliberate policy to keep our numbers down so the noise never gets that bad again. That is not the logic of a comfort story. That is the logic of a system being administered. And the third crack, the one I could not talk myself out of, is that this same core narrative does not stay in one place or one religion. It travels. The creation of humans from clay, the divine decision to destroy them by flood, the single wise man warned in secret who builds a vessel and survives. That skeleton shows up in the later Babylonian epic of Gilgamesh, and it shows up centuries later, stripped of its many gods and rewritten around one in the flood account in Genesis. The oldest, fullest version of the machinery, though, the version that still shows all its gears, the labor, the manufacture, the recall, is this one. Atrahasis, the one on the clay in front of me. Everything downstream looks like a cleaned up copy that quietly deleted the disturbing parts. So I stopped being able to dismiss it as just a myth, not because I think literal gods dug the Tigris, but because the text behaves like a preserved record of a worldview, one that says, out loud, in writing, that humans were made as tools and were nearly discarded as garbage. And someone chose to keep saying it faithfully for over 1,000 years of copying, even after it had every reason to be softened. Here is the thread I promised you I would pull, the one about who chose not to look closely. For most of the modern era, the people who could have made this text famous, the ones who first translated it, treated the disturbing parts as almost embarrassing. Early scholars were far more excited that Atrahasis and Gilgamesh proved the Bible's flood had older roots. That was the headline, "The Flood, the Flood, the Flood." The manufacture of humans as disposable labor, the murdered god of intelligence baked into the clay, the deliberate population control demon, those details were footnoted, discussed in dense academic Akkadian, and quietly left out of the popular story, not through some grand conspiracy, through discomfort, through the very human habit of skipping the page that does not fit the story you came to tell. The evidence was never hidden in a vault. It was hidden in plain sight in a scholarly edition most people would never open, which is almost worse, because it means we did this to ourselves. And that is what sent me back to the single most unsettling detail, the one I built this whole investigation around. But before I take you there, I want to tell you about something I put together for the people who refuse to stop at the surface. I have written 3 books that go deeper into exactly this kind of buried evidence. First, Threshold, Deep Signal, and Hidden Systems. Each one takes a different layer of the record that mainstream history skips past and works it the same way I work it here, source by source, term by term, no comfortable summaries. If you have been sitting here thinking that someone should compile all of this in one place and not flinch, that is what those books are. You can find all 3 linked in the description, and the full set is available at lowstoragens.org for $97. Read the parts everyone else footnoted. Now, back to the line I did not believe until I saw it confirmed in 3 separate scholarly editions. Go back to the moment of creation. They slaughter the god of intelligence, Wheela. They mix his flesh and blood into the clay. We already know the human, Awilu, is named after that killing. But the tablet says something more. It says that from the flesh of the god, a spirit, an etemu, will remain. And here is the exact function. It gives that spirit. It will exist so that the living are never allowed to forget the killing that made them. Let me give you the sense of the actual lines because they are extraordinary. The text says, "Let there be a spirit from the god's flesh. Let it make the living know its sign, so that this is not forgotten. Let the spirit remain." And then comes the detail that put a cold weight in my chest. The text ties this remaining spirit to a sound, to a beat. In the setting of the creation, the gods gather, and there is the beating of a drum, and the language links the pulse of that drum, that steady, unstoppable beat, to the heartbeat that will live inside every human being from then on. The etemu, the ghost of the murdered god, was placed inside us as a permanent marker, and its sign, according to this reading, is the beating in your chest. Sit with what that claims. According to a tablet dated to roughly 1646 before the Common Era, copied by a junior scribe under a great-grandson of Hammurabi, The reason your heart beats is that it is a drum, a reminder, the pulse of a god who was killed so that you could be built, sounding inside you every second of your life so that the crime is never forgotten. The word for you, awilu, is his death spelled out. The thing that keeps you alive, that beat under your ribs, is described as his memorial. That is what Enki actually told humans when you read the whole thing and not the comfortable summary. He did not tell us we were loved. He told us what we were made of and why, and he left the instructions in the clay. We were assembled from earth and murder to carry a burden the gods refused to carry. We were slated for deletion when we got too loud, and the divine spark everyone romanticizes, the little piece of the eternal that supposedly lives in each of us, the tablet identifies with brutal precision, it is a ghost, the ghost of the one they killed, and it never stops beating. I have spent a long time with a lot of ancient texts, and most of them, when you strip away the mystique, become smaller. This one did the opposite. The closer I read, the larger and colder it got, because the specificity never let me off the hook. The name scribe, the dated reign, the two agreeing translations, the wordplay hiding the murder inside the word for man, the three-stage extermination program logged like inventory, the mother goddess weeping that she cannot get her people back, and that final, quiet, devastating instruction that the beat in your chest is a reminder you were never supposed to forget. Here is what I keep coming back to, and I think it is the real reason a document like this survives 4,000 years of copying and translating and being politely ignored. Somewhere under all the gods in the clay, this text is telling us something we already suspect about power, that the ones who build the workers rarely love them, that when the workers become inconvenient, the plan is removal, not rescue, and that the only thing standing between us and the flood in the story is one figure who refused to keep the secret, who warned the doomed anyway, Enki, the maker, breaking his own oath to save the thing he made. That is the piece the later versions kept, even after they deleted everything else. The whisper against the wall, the warning that was not supposed to be given. If you are the kind of person who has always felt that the tidy official version of where we come from was hiding the sharper edges, you were not being paranoid. The sharper edges were right there on the clay, in the footnotes, waiting for someone to read the parts everyone skips. So I want to hear from you, and I want you to actually tell me, not just think it, that detail about the etemu, the ghost of the slain god, and the heartbeat described as his drum, the reminder placed inside every human on purpose. Does that read to you like a Bronze Age poet reaching for a metaphor, or like a memory of something we no longer understand, written down before anyone thought to soften it? Leave me a comment and tell me exactly where you land, and while you are there, tell me what part of the world you are watching from, because I read every single one. If you refuse to accept the easy answer, if you would rather stare at the uncomfortable line in the footnote than the pretty summary on the poster, then you already belong here with the rest of us who keep reopening the cases everyone else swears are closed. Subscribe and stand with us, because the next tablet I am tracing has something even stranger. There is a Sumerian king list that records 8 rulers reigning for 241,000 years before the flood, and I found the moment the scribes tried to quietly correct those numbers and could not explain why they were there in the first place. I will show you what they crossed out. Stay with me. This trail is only getting deeper. I'm going to stop right there on that clay, because inside my membership, the Unexplained Society, I don't stop at all. I pick up exactly where I left off with the full line-by-line translation, and there you can ask me your own question, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You'll belong with mystery lovers like you. Just point your phone at the code on screen. Cancel anytime with one click. Now, if what Enki said unsettled you, wait until you see this. Scientists just uncovered something at Göbekli Tepe that should not exist. And it changes everything we thought we knew. It's starting right here.